was a very interesting panel. I think the best I've ever seen at an ISO meeting. We have about 15 minutes. We have about 15 minutes, which will entertain questions. I'll recognize the questioner, and you can direct it to whom you'd like on the panel. Yes, sir.
Guy Page, Vermont. Oh, how's that? Very good. Guy Page from Vermont. Mr. Grabowski, thank you for that. I've thought about how cool it would be to have someone investigating a wind project up on Lake Champlain, the sixth Great Lake, as we call it sometimes. Can you tell me a bit about the projected rates, the power rates that Deepwater will be getting when you start selling in November?
Yeah, sure. So the Block Island project has a first-year power price of 24 cents, and that will escalate over time. And it's no secret to anyone in this room that's a high power price. But I would argue that it's not atypical for new technologies. I think that if we go back to the vintage of project the Block Island project is from the late 2008, if we take a look at solar projects that were built in the New England region back then, they were built at very comparable power prices. And I think that when we see these new technologies, the real story isn't any particular sort of point in time, but what is the trend line over time? And what we've seen for solar, and everyone in the power business sees what's happening today in the solar business, power prices are declining dramatically. And in many places in the United States, onshore wind is very competitive, so competitive that traditional generators are complaining that wind power is too cheap. And in Texas, some wind is being sold at 1.5 cents in many places. Offshore wind is going to do the same thing. And so we need to make investments in these early projects so that we can build progressively larger projects at progressively larger scale. And I think that we'll be surprised by the price point that we see the next generation of offshore wind projects in New England come in at. As I mentioned when I spoke previously, the most recent projects in Europe that have won auctions, price auctions, are coming in at under 10 cents to deliver that energy. And so that's where this industry is headed. So when we are at Deepwater preparing to compete against our competitors, our rivals here in New England, our two competitors who also plan to build projects, we expect that we're going to see pricing in the low teens for these next projects. So it's increasingly competitive, and it's an enormous resource that is only beginning its journey to maturity.
Do you expect any trouble with the, as the industry grows and volume grows, with acquiring the rare earths for the turbines? I mean, is that ever going to be an issue, or is that just a sort of a smoke screen people throw up?
Well, the turbine manufacturers, that's certainly one of the principal issues that they face. Many direct drive turbines that don't use generators use permanent magnets. Those permanent magnets require rare earths. Fortunately, there are pretty rapid advances in the kinds of materials that are needed for those permanent magnets. And because many manufacturers like GE and Siemens and others who are building lots of turbines, lots of permanent magnets, they are finding new synthetic ways to replace many of the rarest of those rare earths. So I think what they tell us in the development community is that the rare earth shortage that sometimes you hear about is something that, from a technology perspective, they see an ability to sort of get through by changing the rare earths that they use.
Jump to this side. Yes, sir.
Two questions for Mr.
Is
Balsky.
that mic on?
Yeah.
Turn it towards you. Thank you.
Okay. Two questions for Mr. Jablonski. At the Deepwater Wind site, is there potential to add additional turbines at that site? And
at the Block Island site, no.
At Block Island site, no. What percentage of the output of self-pay?
Probably about 10%. Over the course of an average year, about 10% of the energy will be used on the island, and about 90% will make it to the mainland. Conversely, something like 90% of the island's energy needs will be satisfied by the project itself. Now, the cable that we talked about that connects the project and the island to the mainland is a bidirectional cable. So if the wind farm is not producing enough energy in any particular hour, the distribution system on the island, the utility that exists on the island, will be able to draw energy from the mainland.
Do we have any questions for any of the other panelists?
Yeah, I have a question for Mr.
Yes, sir.
The question I wanted to pose had to do with the numbers that we heard from Mr. Cruz from Spectra. He referenced the fact that Algonquin is now essentially at that capacity, 24/7, 365, moving product to the Northeast, to New England. And I was wondering whether or not that fact was an inhibitor for the indoor energy project in Burrowville, because your draw, of course, is going to be on the Algonquin system. I don't know what your numbers are, because I don't think I saw them in the presentation, but is there is that built into the existing IT space on Algonquin in terms of your ability to draw from Algonquin during its high capacity moments?
Well, there is answers. National Grid or Inventor.
Currently, there is no long-term firm capacity commitments between Energy and Algonquin. I don't know the specifics of their supply situation in terms of how they're planning to get natural gas delivered to their plants. There is numerous options out there currently on a secondary market basis. The point I would make, though, is that on a cold winter day, a peak day demand, the capacity that we see being used by the vast majority of the gas-fired generators is essential to essentially interruptible transportation and would be interrupted to serve base load demands by the LDCs. But in terms of how they plan to run, you need to ask them.
Looking for a question for John Nyland at all? Yes, sir.
It's for Energy. You have 88 megawatts of storage. Could you tell us something about the storage as an investment opportunity now, and how you see storage having an impact on the system as a whole over the next, say, 10 years?
How we use the storage, as I said, was in concert with some of our renewable projects, primarily the wind projects. The capacity for them to produce 88 megawatts is rather short-lived. It probably spans something like about 20, 30 minutes. So it's used in more of a regulation sense. We have done studies to look at, providing, more capacity over a longer period of time, 4 hours, 8 hours, but we found that, the current state of technology, that it's really cost prohibitive. So right now, I think our view is that, putting energy storage in areas where, National Grid probably would be a better person to opine on this, but in areas where, the electric transmission system needs that regulation support, something that could perhaps avoid additional transmission or distribution system upgrade, is probably, best suited for that. We use it to help smooth out the energy production from our renewable sources.
Any questions for Bill? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'll ask a question for Bill, I guess. We saw the transmission rates earlier from the ISO presentation, and it's always something that I've remarked on, that if you go back to the early 2000s, let's say 2003 to today, you see that the transmission rate has actually increased at about 700-800%.
And what then I think about is one of the questions earlier today, asked a very good question on what's causing that. And what we do know is that typically you'd see that kind of increase because there's a lot of growth and a lot of transmission has to be built. But in fact, we're not seeing growth. I think the last New England peak was in 2006. So how do you then, how do you benchmark that against anything? Is that good, bad? When you look across the country, are other people, other areas seeing 700-800% growth in transmission costs? Because it's now gone from, like I say, 0.3% to, it's projected to go over 2 cents, right, per kilowatt hour for everyone in New England.
Good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question. So I think there's a couple things going on. First, I think the growth and build-out that we saw over the last 7 to 8 years had a lot to do with asset condition, bringing the transmission network up to a modern state. And that's driven a lot of the investment in the National Grid Service Territory. I think what you may see going forward, though, is as we start to get large-scale renewables looking to connect in the system, especially onshore, there could be additional needs to build transmission to bring those renewable resources to the marketplace. Whether that's large-scale hydro or large-scale wind that's located well away from the demand center. So, I think in the national grid system, there was some growth, but probably more predominantly the investment was around asset condition. And I think in the future, some of the growth potential in transmission is really around bringing renewables to the marketplace.
Can you answer the question?
I can challenge a little bit of it because I thought that, been involved with a few projects myself, I thought that the interconnection cost, any upgrade cost would be on the back of the project, not the rate pay.
Yeah, so specifically around interconnection use project, you're absolutely right. That particular project has the responsibility to pay for the interconnection cost. But I think as an end-use customer, you're going to pay transmission, distribution, and the commodity rate that's going to make up your bill. And I think whether it's I don't think National Grid as a regulated entity is going to be necessarily building transmission to bring renewables down into market. But there's certainly other developers who are looking at that, and I think there is transmission that will be built in the future to bring renewables to market, and ultimately that transmission cost will make it into customers' bills. You're right, from a pure interconnection perspective, absolutely, projects have that responsibility.
Yes, sir. And I would ask for a question and not a speech or a statement.
Sure. I have a question for the three gentlemen whose infrastructure projects would expand the use of hydraulic fracturing in the Marcellus Shale, which is linked to climate change. I heard a lot of 2030, 2040, 2050 future for clean energy, but as we know right now, people are already being resettled from sea level rise in Louisiana. There's projections for 9 feet of sea level rise by 2060 from the former head of NASA. And I was wondering, especially concerning the Fields Point LNG liquefaction facility, Invenergy's power plant, Enbridge's Access Northeast, and the Dakota Access Pipeline. Do your companies have any plans to pay restitution for the millions of people around the world who are going to be displaced, negatively impacted, and killed by the development of your projects and projects in the future? No, the question is, do your companies have any money set aside for restitution for the millions of people that are going to be displaced and killed by the infrastructure projects that you all are proposing? Thank you. And any of you can take them. I would love to hear from all three of you since they're such large projects.
Gentlemen, anyone?
No.
One of the things that I mentioned earlier was that, bringing in a project like the power plant that we're talking about with its improved efficiency will actually reduce demand on natural gas supply. And I think if you go back and look at the Public Utility Commission opinion, that was one of the things that they agreed with, that improving overall system efficiency will reduce natural gas demand and actually result in not only that reduction, but result in ratepayer savings.
So that would be a no.
All right, it is 3:31. We're on target. I want to thank ISO for their support of the ISO New England Consumer Liaison Group, for the speakers who came earlier, and certainly for the panelists for doing a great job, and all of you for being so attentive. Thank you.